The fog came in thick off the black water, swallowing the streetlights and turning the asphalt into something slick and reflective, like oil. It was the kind of night where headlights didn't just illuminate, they interrogated. The amber high beams cut through the mist in twin columns, harsh and unblinking, turning the abandoned loading zone into an improvised stage. A small crowd had gathered. Not many, Jensen Park didn't need witnesses, but Dawson had brought them anyway. Insurance, maybe. Or cowardice dressed up as strategy. Men in leather jackets leaned against rusted fencing, arms crossed, faces half hidden by cigarette smoke. Women in too tight dresses whispered behind manicured nails. Everyone knew what this was. Her name was Elena, 23 years old. White blouse soaked through from the rain, dark hair plastered to her cheeks, hands trembling at her sides like she was trying to hold her bones together from the inside. Dawson shoved her forward, not gently, not even carefully, just pushed her into the glare of those headlights like she was cargo being delivered late. "She's yours," Dawson said, his voice cracking on the second word. "Young, clean, never been trouble. The debt is paid." The crowd didn't gasp. They just shifted, weight from foot to foot, eyes sliding sideways, the universal language of people pretending they hadn't seen something ugly. "She's got no ties," Dawson added, louder now, like volume could erase the shake in his hands. "No boyfriend, no job worth keeping. She'll do whatever you need. That's worth more than the money, right? That's worth settling this." Elena didn't beg. She tried that once, years ago, when her father first started gambling away the rent. Once when her mother told her to be smart and make herself useful. It hadn't mattered then. So she stood there, rain mixing with something hotter on her face, the weight of being sold pressing down on her chest like a hand. Behind Dawson, half hidden in the shadow of a shipping container, Annie stood with her arms wrapped around herself. Expensive coat, hair still done, eyes on the ground, lips pressed into a bloodless line. She didn't speak, didn't stop it, just watched, and when one of the men muttered something crude, she turned her head just enough to pretend she hadn't heard. When the exchange was done, she'd leave with everyone else, head down, swallowed by the fog, as if she hadn't come to watch her daughter be sold. As if she'd only been there to make sure the deal went through. A car door opened. The man who stepped out was tall, shoulders filling the frame of a tailored black suit that didn't belong on a dock at midnight. The fog clung to him like it knew better than to get in his way. No hat, just dark hair swept back, jawline sharp enough to cut, and eyes that didn't blink in the headlights. His shoes hit the pavement with the kind of weight that made the crowd go quiet. Jensen Park. He didn't ask her name, didn't circle her like an appraisal. He simply raised one hand, palm out, fingers spread, and the night stopped breathing. "Enough," he said. Not loud. He didn't need to be. From inside his coat, he pulled a slim black envelope and tossed it onto the hood of Dawson's car. It landed with a slap. The crowd leaned in. Dawson's hand shot out, fingers already counting before he even touched it. "You sure?" Dawson stammered, looking up from the cash, trying to read Jensen's face in the dark. "I mean, she's..." Jensen's hand didn't lower. The gesture remained, "Stop." And Dawson's mouth snapped shut like a trap. If this one pulled you in, please subscribe and stay with the channel. More stories like this are coming. Midnight. East Harbor District. Somewhere between the warehouse row and the river. The fog came in thick off the black water, swallowing the streetlights and turning the asphalt into something slick and reflective, like oil. It was the kind of night where headlights didn't just illuminate, they interrogated. The amber high beams cut through the mist in twin columns, harsh and unblinking, turning the abandoned loading zone into an improvised stage. A small crowd had gathered. Not many, Jensen Park didn't need witnesses, but Dawson had brought them anyway. Insurance, maybe. Or cowardice dressed up as strategy. Men in leather jackets leaned against rusted fencing, arms crossed, faces half hidden by cigarette smoke. Women in too tight dresses whispered behind manicured nails. Everyone knew what this was. Her name was Elena, 23 years old. White blouse soaked through from the rain, dark hair plastered to her cheeks, hands trembling at her sides like she was trying to hold her bones together from the inside. Dawson shoved her forward. Not gently, not even carefully, just pushed her into the glare of those headlights like she was cargo being delivered late. "She's yours," Dawson said, his voice cracking on the second word. "Young, clean, never been trouble. The debt is paid." The crowd didn't gasp. They just shifted, weight from foot to foot, eyes sliding sideways, the universal language of people pretending they hadn't seen something ugly. "She's got no ties," Dawson added, louder now, like volume could erase the shake in his hands. "No boyfriend, no job worth keeping. She'll do whatever you need. That's worth more than the money, right? That's worth settling this." Elena didn't beg. She tried that once years ago, when her father first started gambling away the rent. Once when her mother told her to be smart and make herself useful. It hadn't mattered then. So she stood there, rain mixing with something hotter on her face, the weight of being sold pressing down on her chest like a hand. Behind Dawson, half hidden in the shadow of a shipping container, Annie stood with her arms wrapped around herself. Expensive coat, hair still done, eyes on the ground, lips pressed into a bloodless line. She didn't speak, didn't stop it, just watched, and when one of the men muttered something crude, she turned her head just enough to pretend she hadn't heard. When the exchange was done, she'd leave with everyone else, head down, swallowed by the fog, as if she hadn't come to watch her daughter be sold. As if she'd only been there to make sure the deal went through. A car door opened. The man who stepped out was tall, shoulders filling the frame of a tailored black suit that didn't belong on a dock at midnight. The fog clung to him like it knew better than to get in his way. No hat, just dark hair swept back, jawline sharp enough to cut, and eyes that didn't blink in the headlights. His shoes hit the pavement with the kind of weight that made the crowd go quiet. Jensen Park. He didn't ask her name, didn't circle her like an appraisal. He simply raised one hand, palm out, fingers spread, and the night stopped breathing. "Enough," he said. Not loud. He didn't need to be. From inside his coat, he pulled a slim black envelope and tossed it onto the hood of Dawson's car. It landed with a slap. The crowd leaned in. Dawson's hand shot out, fingers already counting before he even touched it. "You sure?" Dawson stammered, looking up from the cash, trying to read Jensen's face in the dark. Jensen's hand didn't lower. The gesture remained, "Stop." And Dawson's mouth snapped shut like a trap. The car smelled like leather and something expensive Elena couldn't name. Jensen didn't speak during the drive. He sat across from her in the back seat, one hand resting on his knee, eyes fixed somewhere past the tinted window. Elena kept her hands folded in her lap, nails digging into her palms hard enough to leave marks. She'd stopped shaking somewhere around the third turn off the docks, but only because her body had run out of adrenaline to burn. The estate appeared through the fog like a knife through silk, all glass and steel and sharp angles that didn't belong in the same world as her father's cramped apartment. Gates rolled open without a sound. Gravel crunched under the tires. When the car stopped, Jensen stepped out first and didn't wait for her to follow. She did anyway. What choice did she have? Inside, the foyer stretched upward into shadow, lit by fixtures that cost more than Elena had ever seen in cash. Her shoes, cheap, wet, already falling apart, squeaked on marble so polished she could see her reflection staring back. A woman in a crisp uniform appeared from somewhere, silent and efficient, and gestured toward a staircase that curved like a question mark. Elena expected a basement. A locked room. Chains maybe, or at least a bolted door. She'd spent the entire drive imagining what came next, each scenario worse than the last, until her mind had gone numb with it. What she got was the third floor. The woman opened a door and stepped aside. Elena walked in and stopped. Floor-to-ceiling windows. A bed large enough to get lost in. Furniture that looked like it had been pulled from a magazine spread. A bathroom with fixtures that gleamed under soft lighting. It was cleaner than anywhere she'd ever lived. Quieter, too. "This is yours," the woman said, her voice clipped but not unkind. "Clothes in the closet. Bathroom stocked. Dinner is at 8 if you want it. No one will bother you. Then she left. Elena stood in the center of the room, arms wrapped around herself, waiting for the trap to spring. She checked the door unlocked. Checked the windows, they opened. Checked the closet and found clothes in her size. Tags still attached, nothing revealing or degrading. Just normal. Expensive but normal. She sat on the edge of the bed and waited. An hour passed. Then 2. When the door finally opened, she flinched so hard she nearly fell off the mattress. Jensen stood in the doorway, still in his suit, tie loosened but not removed. He didn't step inside. Just leaned against the frame, arms crossed, watching her with an expression she couldn't read. "You are not a slave here," he said. His voice was low, deliberate, like he was explaining something to a child. "You don't owe me obedience. You don't owe me gratitude. You don't owe me anything." Elena stared at him, heart hammering against her ribs. "Then what am I?" she whispered. Jensen's jaw tightened. For a moment something flickered behind his eyes, something that looked almost like anger, but not at her. "Safe," he said. Then he stepped back and closed the door. The lock didn't click. The call came 3 days later. Elena heard Jensen's voice through the door. Calm, measured, the kind of tone that made threats sound like invitations. She couldn't make out the words, but she knew that cadence by now. Someone was being summoned. When the woman in the uniform knocked and told her to dress for dinner, Elena's stomach dropped. The dining room was all dark wood and cold light, a table long enough to seat 12 but set for only 3. Jensen stood at the head, hands in his pockets, watching the door like he'd been waiting. When Elena entered, he gestured to the chair at his right. She sat, fingers knotted in her lap, eyes on the empty plate in front of her. Then Dawson walked in. He looked smaller than she remembered. Older too. His shirt was wrinkled, collar damp with sweat despite the chill in the room. His eyes found Elena immediately, then darted away just as fast. Guilt maybe. Or fear. She couldn't tell anymore. "Sit," Jensen said, nodding toward the chair across from Elena. Dawson sat. His hand shook as he pulled the chair in, the legs scraping against the floor loud enough to make Elena flinch. No one spoke. A door opened behind them and staff appeared, silent, precise, carrying covered dishes that smelled like rosemary and butter and things Elena had only seen in restaurant windows. The first plate was set in front of her. Steak perfectly seared, vegetables arranged like art. A glass of wine poured with care. Dawson's plate stayed empty. He opened his mouth. Whether to speak or protest, Elena didn't know. But Jensen's hand came up, one finger raised, and Dawson's jaw snapped shut. "Eat," Jensen said to Elena. Not a command. An instruction. Elena stared at the food. Her stomach twisted. She could feel Dawson watching her, could feel the weight of his stare like fingers pressing into her skin. She picked up the fork. Her hand trembled. The first bite tasted like ash. "Good," Jensen said quietly. He didn't touch his own plate. Just leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, eyes fixed on Dawson. "She eats first now. Always. Do you understand?" Dawson's face went red. "I'm her father." "You sold her," Jensen interrupted, voice still calm, still soft. "You stood in the rain and offered her like livestock. So no, you're not her father. You're the man who traded her for breathing room." Dawson's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. Jensen gestured, and a plate was finally set in front of Dawson, smaller, plainer, the kind of meal you'd give someone you were tolerating, not hosting. Dawson stared at it like it might bite him. "Eat," Jensen said again. This time it was a command. Dawson picked up his fork with shaking hands. Elena watched him cut into cold chicken, watched him chew without tasting, watched him realize, slowly, painfully, that the hierarchy had flipped. She was served first. He was served last. And Jensen controlled every bite. If you enjoyed this story and felt the tension, please consider subscribing. It really helps the channel. And more Mafia stories are on the way. Now let's continue. Elena woke to the smell of smoke. She bolted upright, heart slamming against her ribs, sheets tangled around her legs. For a moment she thought the estate was burning. Then she saw the orange glow through the window, controlled, deliberate, contained to the stone fire pit in the garden below. She pulled on a robe and went downstairs barefoot, following the scent of burning fabric into the cold morning air. Jensen stood beside the fire, sleeves rolled to his elbows, feeding something into the flames. It took her a moment to recognize the white blouse. Her white blouse. The one she'd worn the night he bought her. "What are you doing?" The words came out sharper than she'd intended. Jensen didn't look up. He tossed in a pair of jeans next, watched them catch and curl. "Getting rid of things you don't need anymore." Elena's throat tightened. Those were her clothes. The only clothes she'd brought with her. Everything she owned was either on her back or in that fire, turning to ash and smoke. "You can't just..." She stepped forward, hands clenched. "Those are mine." "They were," Jensen said. He finally turned to face her, and his expression was unreadable in the firelight. "They belong to the girl your father sold. You're not her anymore." "Then who am I?" He didn't answer right away. Just watched her, the flames casting shadows across his face, turning his eyes into something darker than they already were. Then he nodded toward the house. "Come with me." She followed him back inside, through hallways she still didn't know by heart, up to the 3rd floor. He stopped at a door she'd never opened, 2 down from her own room, and pushed it wide. The room was full of clothes. Racks of them. Dresses, blouses, slacks, jackets. All in her size, all still tagged. All waiting like soldiers in formation. There were shoes lined beneath. Accessories on a table. A full-length mirror that reflected a version of Elena she didn't recognize. Barefoot, pale, swimming in a robe too large for her frame. "This is excessive," she whispered. "This is preparation," Jensen corrected. He stepped into the room, hands in his pockets, scanning the racks like he was inspecting inventory. "You've spent your entire life following orders. Your father's. Your mother's. Anyone who thought they had the right to tell you what to do." Elena's jaw tightened. "And now I follow yours." "No." He turned to face her, and there was something almost like frustration in his voice. "You learn. There's a difference." "Learn what?" "To lead." He gestured toward the clothes, the room, the life he was offering whether she wanted it or not. To speak without apologizing. To walk into a room and own it. To stop waiting for permission to exist. Elena stared at him, something hot and unfamiliar rising in her chest. Anger maybe. Or hope. She couldn't tell which burned worse. "I don't know how," she said quietly. Jensen's expression softened. "Just barely, just enough." "I know," he said. "That's why we're starting now." He walked to the door, paused at the threshold. "The girl in the rain is dead," he said without looking back. "Let her stay that way." They came at dusk, when the light was failing and the security cameras were harder to read in silhouette. Dawson had always been better at scheming than execution. Annie had always been better at pretending she wasn't part of the scheme at all. They parked 2 blocks away, walked the perimeter like tourists admiring architecture, and found a section of fence where the iron met overgrown hedges. Dawson went first, grunting as he squeezed through a gap that hadn't been a gap at all until he forced it. Annie followed, her coat snagging on metal, her breath coming fast and shallow. "This is insane," she hissed. "If he finds out." "He won't," Dawson muttered, already moving toward the east wing where he'd seen Elena's window lit the night before. "We're her parents. We have a right to check on her. We sold her. We made a deal." He stopped, turned, grabbed her wrist hard enough to hurt. "And I want to make sure our investment is paying off." Annie jerked her hand free but didn't argue. She never did. They made it halfway across the garden before the lights came on. Not the estate lights, those stayed dim, almost welcoming. These were floods, white and blinding, mounted on poles they hadn't noticed in the dark. The beams pinned them like insects under glass. Dawson threw up a hand to shield his eyes. Annie froze, her mouth open in a silent gasp. Then the dogs came. Not barking. That would have been a mercy. These were silent, trained, muscles coiled under sleek black coats, teeth bared just enough to promise pain. They formed a loose circle around Dawson and Annie, close enough to strike, patient enough to wait. "Don't move," a voice said from somewhere beyond the light. A man stepped into view, broad-shouldered, shaved head, wearing a suit too nice for security work. He wasn't holding a weapon. He didn't need to. The dogs were weapon enough. "We're her parents," Dawson said, voice cracking on the second word. "We just want to see her. Make sure she's okay." The man tilted his head, almost curious. "You want to check on your investment?" Dawson's face went pale. "Yeah," the man continued, pulling a phone from his pocket. "We heard you coming 3 blocks out. Had a pool going on how far you'd make it." He tapped the screen, held it to his ear. "Boss? They're here." Annie's knees buckled. She caught herself on Dawson's arm, nails digging through fabric. A door opened somewhere behind them. Footsteps on stone, slow and deliberate. Jensen emerged from the shadows like he'd been born there, hands in his pockets, expression carved from ice. "Checking on your investment," he repeated, voice soft, almost amused. "That's what she is to you, isn't it? A transaction you want to audit." "We have rights," Dawson stammered. "She's our daughter." "No." Jensen stepped closer, and the dogs shifted, sensing the change in their master's mood. "She was your daughter. Then you sold her. You don't get to reclaim the merchandise after the deal is done." Annie finally found her voice. "We just wanted to see if she's happy." Jensen's laugh was cold and sharp. "You wanted to see if I've broken her yet. If she's compliant. If the monster you sold her to is doing his job." He gestured, and the security guard stepped forward. "Escort them out," Jensen said. "And make sure they understand the fence has cameras now. The gates have sensors. The next time they trespass, I won't call security." He leaned in close enough for Dawson to smell his cologne. "I'll call her. And I'll let her decide what happens to you." The conference room sat on the 40th floor of a building that owned half the skyline. Glass walls, leather chairs, a table polished enough to reflect the faces of men who'd bought their way into this room with blood and favors. Elena sat in the corner, hands folded in her lap, wearing a charcoal suit Jensen had left on her bed that morning with a single instruction: observe. She wasn't sure what she was supposed to be observing. The men barely acknowledged her. To them, she was decoration. Jensen's latest acquisition. Proof that he could afford softness. They had no idea how wrong they were. The meeting started civilly enough. Talk of territories, shipping routes, percentages. A man named Kovac, thick-necked, gold rings on every finger, led most of the conversation. He smiled too much, laughed too loud, kept glancing at Jensen like he was waiting for approval that never came. "So we're agreed," Kovac said, spreading his hands like a priest offering benediction. 70-30 split on the dockyard operations. You get the lion's share, I get peace of mind. Everybody wins. Jensen didn't respond immediately. He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, eyes half closed like he was bored. Elena recognized that look now. It wasn't boredom. It was calculation. Who else knows about this deal? Jensen asked quietly. Kovac's smile faltered. Just us. That's the beauty of it. Clean, simple, no outside interference. Funny, Jensen said. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a slim tablet, slid it across the table. Because my people intercepted communications between you and the Volkov crew yesterday. Same deal. Same docs. Except you offered them 80%. The room went silent. Kovac's face drained of color. That's a misunderstanding. A negotiation tactic. I was always going to come back to you. With my docs sold to my enemies and a sob story about market pressures, Jensen finished. He stood slowly, buttoning his jacket with the kind of precision that made every movement feel like a threat. You thought I valued coin over loyalty. That I'd take 30% of something rather than walk away with nothing. Jensen, please. You were wrong. Jensen walked around the table, past Kovac, past the other men who'd gone very still in their chairs. He stopped at the window, hands in his pockets, looking out at the city spread below like a chessboard. "Here's what's going to happen," he said, voice calm, almost conversational. "You're going to call Volkov. You're going to tell him the deal is off. Then you're going to transfer full operational control of those docks to me, not 70%, not 80%. All of it." Kovac shot to his feet. "That's insane. I'll be ruined." "You'll be breathing," Jensen corrected, turning to face him. "Which is more than you'd be if I let this play out the way you planned." Elena watched Kovac's face cycle through rage, panic, calculation. Watched him realize that Jensen wasn't negotiating, wasn't posturing, was simply laying out the consequences of betrayal with the detachment of a surgeon explaining a procedure. Kovac sat back down. "Fine," he whispered. Jensen nodded once, then gestured toward the door. "Gentlemen, we're done here." As the room emptied, Jensen walked to where Elena sat and extended his hand. "Now you've seen it," he said quietly. "Power isn't volume. It's certainty." The Red Vipers operated out of a warehouse on the south side, where the city forgot to put streetlights and the police forgot to patrol. Dawson sat across from their lieutenant, a man named Sergey with a scar that ran from temple to jaw and eyes like dirty ice, while Annie stood behind him, arms crossed, playing the role of reluctant accomplice she'd perfected over the years. "You're saying Jensen Park has gone soft," Sergey said, fingers drumming on the table between them. "Over a girl." "My girl," Dawson corrected, leaning forward like proximity would sell the lie better. "He's keeping her locked up in that estate, playing house, dressing her up, parading her around like she's his goddamn protégé." He spat the word like it tasted rotten. Man like that? Used to gut people for looking at him wrong? Now he's teaching her about business meetings and power dynamics. It's pathetic. Sergey's expression didn't change. Or its strategy. It's weakness, Dawson insisted. And weakness is opportunity. You get her out, you can flip her to the Kozlov family for 3 times what Jensen paid. They've been looking for leverage against him for months. His soft spot, wrapped up in a pretty package. Annie shifted her weight, and Sergey's eyes flicked to her. "You're quiet." "I'm her mother," Annie said softly, and the performance was flawless. The trembling voice, the downcast eyes, the hands that wrung themselves like they were trying to squeeze out guilt. "I just want her safe. Away from that monster." "Away from the monster," Sergey repeated slowly. "And into the hands of the Kozlovs, who'll use her as bait to start a war." He smiled, and it was the kind of smile that didn't reach anywhere near his eyes. "You're either stupid or desperate. Maybe both." "We're realistic," Dawson shot back. "Jensen's distracted. His security is focused outward, not inward. The girl trusts him now, or thinks she does. She won't see it coming." Sergey leaned back in his chair, considering. The warehouse was silent except for the drip of water somewhere in the dark and the distant rumble of trucks on the highway. 30%, he finally said. 50, Dawson countered. 40, and you get to walk out of here with your kneecaps intact. Dawson swallowed hard, then nodded. Deal. Sergey stood, extending a hand that Dawson shook too eagerly. We move in 3 days. Friday night. Jensen hosts a dinner for his legitimate business partners. Lots of civilians, lots of cameras. He won't risk a scene. We go in quiet, take her from her room, and she's gone before dessert is served. And if it goes wrong? Annie asked, voice barely above a whisper. Sergey looked at her like she'd asked if the sun might not rise. Then you better hope Jensen kills you quick. Because if he finds out you sold her twice. He pulled on his jacket, adjusted the collar. The Kozlovs will seem like mercy. Dawson and Annie left through the back exit, stepping into an alley that smelled like piss and rot. Neither of them spoke until they were 3 blocks away. This is going to work, Dawson said, more to himself than to her. Annie said nothing, just pulled her coat tighter and wondered if 30 pieces of silver had felt this heavy. The penthouse smelled like expensive wine and impending violence. Elena knew something was wrong the moment Jensen's head of security appeared at her door, face carved from granite, and said 3 words, "Stay behind me." They moved through the hallway in formation, Elena in the center, 4 men in black surrounding her like a human shield. The dinner party continued below, the hum of polite conversation and clinking glasses floating up through the floors like nothing was happening. Like armed men weren't currently breaching the east stairwell. Like her parents hadn't just sold her for the second time. Jensen was waiting in the penthouse lounge, standing at the window with his back to the door. He didn't turn when they entered. Just spoke to the glass, to the city lights reflected there. "Let them come up." The security chief hesitated. "Sir." "Let them come up," Jensen repeated. "All of them." 2 minutes later, the elevator doors opened and chaos spilled out. 4 Red Vipers, guns drawn but not raised, just visible enough to make a point. Sergei at the front, that scar pulling his smile into something grotesque. And behind them, as if they'd been dragged along by obligation rather than choice, Dawson and Annie. Dawson saw Elena and his face crumpled with something that might have been relief or might have been performance. "Elena, thank God. We're getting you out of here." Elena stared at him. At the man who'd shoved her into headlights and called it payment. At the woman behind him who'd watched it happen and said nothing. "Out of here," she repeated, voice flat. "He's twisted your mind," Annie said, stepping forward with hands outstretched like she was approaching a frightened animal. "Made you think this is normal. But sweetheart, this isn't love. This is captivity. We're your family. You sold me. We saved you," Dawson corrected, voice rising. "From debt collectors who would have done worse. We gave you to someone who could protect you. And now we're trying to fix our mistake. By selling me again?" Elena's voice cut through the room like a blade. "To the Kozlovs? For 3 times the price." The silence that followed was absolute. Sergei's eyes narrowed. Dawson's mouth opened and closed. Annie went pale. Jensen finally turned from the window. He looked at Elena, then at the guns, then at Dawson with an expression that could have frozen blood. "She's been listening to your calls," he said quietly. "Every conversation, every deal, every lie you told yourselves to justify this." He walked to a side table, opened a drawer and pulled out a handgun. Checked the chamber with the casual efficiency of a man who'd done it 10,000 times. Then he walked to Elena and held it out. "Your choice," he said. Elena stared at the weapon, at the weight of it, at what it represented. "I'm not asking you to kill them," Jensen continued, voice soft. "I'm asking you to decide. Do you go with the people who've sold you twice and call it love? Or do you stay with the man who's never lied about what he is?" Dawson lunged forward. "Elena, please." She took the gun. Not to aim it. Not to fire. Just to hold it, feel its weight and understand that for the first time in her life, the power in the room belonged to her. She looked at her parents, really looked at them. Saw the desperation. The calculation. The performance of care that had never, not once, been real. Then she looked at Jensen. At the man who'd burned her past and handed her a future with no promises except honesty. "Get them out," she said. Jensen smiled. It was a terrible, beautiful thing. "You heard her." The balcony overlooked the city like a throne overlooking a kingdom. Elena stood at the railing, hands wrapped around cold metal, watching the lights below blur into constellations. Behind her, the penthouse had gone quiet. The Red Vipers, escorted out by men who knew how to make problems disappear. Dawson and Annie, dragged into an elevator with the kind of silence that preceded exile. The dinner party below, still humming with oblivious conversation, unaware that an empire had just shifted on the floors above them. Jensen emerged from inside, 2 glasses in hand. He set one beside her on the railing, then leaned against the glass barrier, close but not touching. "They'll try again," Elena said. Not a question. Fact. "No," Jensen replied. He took a slow sip, eyes on the skyline. "They won't." "You're that sure?" "I'm that thorough." He turned to look at her, and in the low light, his face was all sharp angles and shadow. Your father's accounts are frozen. Your mother's passport is flagged. The Kozlovs received a very detailed file on their would-be partners, complete with evidence of 3 prior failed deals and a history of turning informant when cornered. The Red Vipers. He smiled cold and precise. Let's just say Sergei is currently explaining to his superiors why he took a meeting without clearance. Elena absorbed the sheer scope of it. While she'd been standing in that room holding a gun, Jensen had already dismantled the entire conspiracy from 6 different angles. You knew, she said quietly. Before tonight. You knew they were coming. The moment your father made the first call. Jensen set his glass down. I could have stopped it earlier. Quietly. But you needed to see it. To hear them say it out loud. To understand that the people who claimed to love you were the ones auctioning off pieces of your soul. Elena's throat tightened. That's cruel. That's necessary. He straightened, hands in his pockets, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked almost tired. You would have spent the rest of your life wondering if I poisoned you against them. If maybe they changed. If blood really was thicker than everything else. He paused. Now you know. She did. God help her, she did. What was the real debt? Elena asked, turning to face him fully. You said my father owed you. But it wasn't money. What was it? Jensen was quiet for a long moment, weighing the truth against its cost. Then he spoke, voice low and edged with something that might have been old pain. 15 years ago, your father gave up the location of a safe house. My family was inside. He got paid $30,000 for the tip. He met her eyes. My sister was 12. Elena's breath caught. I didn't take you to settle the debt, Jensen continued. I took you to end the cycle. To make sure that cowardice and greed didn't get passed down one more generation. He stepped closer and his voice softened. The debt isn't yours to carry. It never was. Elena looked down at her hands, steady now, no longer shaking, no longer folded in submission. She thought about the girl in the rain, about the daughter who'd been sold like currency, about the woman who'd stood in a penthouse and chosen cold truth over warm lies. Then she raised her hand, palm out, fingers spread, and held it between them. The gesture Jensen had used that first night. The stop sign that had silenced her father and changed her life. I'm not going back, she said. Jensen's expression shifted. Something like pride, something like relief. Good, he said. Because you were never theirs to reclaim. The city stretched below them, infinite and indifferent. But up here, 40 stories above the streets where she'd been sold, Elena finally understood what freedom tasted like. It tasted like smoke and expensive wine and the death of debts that were never hers to pay. If you enjoyed this story and felt the tension, please consider subscribing. It really helps the channel. And more Mafia stories are on the way.